Okay, good evening, everyone. Glad you're joining us again tonight. I finally have remembered to record this through everybody um, actually reminding me, so much appreciate that. We're going to continue on tonight with our study on scientific evidences of the Bible's inspiration. I'm going to go back and record some of these other lessons that I had failed to record, but always going through just a quick review, high-level review of what we covered. We looked at the first part about what you believe and why, creation of the earth and universe, and we've decided for what we're talking about tonight, we're really focusing on the new earth theory, which I believe most Christians tend to believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and Genesis 1 was six 24-hour days. But we also respect those who may not believe that and still believe that God created all. And again, all we know from Genesis 1 is that there was an evening, there was a morning and an evening, and that is what was one day. We talked about chances and how it would happen with formation of life, and then we moved on to actually scientific evidences of oceanography, astronomy, oceanography, food laws, physics, and tonight we're actually going to be getting more into oceanography, food laws, and physics and medicine. So I'm going to skip down through a few slides that we've already covered. A lot of fun with math that we already had, looking at the impossibility and the conclusion we came to: with God, all things are possible, but how impossible it would be to form the earth, form the universe, it being as precise as what it is, and then to begin to form life, and that all of these things could happen by accident. Again, the scenario I used is you have better odds, we know, of not just being struck by lightning, but better odds of taking electronics, a modern example, throwing that into a box, shaking it up, and then out comes an iPhone. The other odd or statistic that we used was that to understand about numbers, if we began to take the pennies, and the previous one, not necessarily this slide, but if we began to take all of the pennies that you may have that you could fill up North America 2 feet deep, enough to fill up North America 2 feet deep. You mark one with an X, you fly over in a helicopter and pick that up. That would be the equivalent of 10 with 19 zeros, or 4.3 with 19 zeros. And that's what they call impossible. So yeah, you may say at that point, it is impossible to cover North America 2 feet deep with pennies, mark it, and then fly over and pick it up. And then somebody say, well, it is possible. Okay, I'll give that to you. Now, the numbers say it's impossible, but somebody says it is possible. Well, you give them enough chances, you give them 4.3 times 10 with 19 zeros, can't even have a number for that, or a name for that, then yeah, if you had that many chances, there would be a chance that could happen. But then you began to look at the chance of the universe forming by itself, 10 with 33 zeros, and so on, and so on, and so on, to where even forming a life, 10 with 40,000 zeros. Now, that's just a gnat. Now, begin putting it all together. We can't even calculate the number. So the bottom line is, it's impossible for things to happen without a designer that we have today, and living in a precisely tuned universe. While we've looked for life on Mars and looked for life on different planets, and we seek to find these other things, we know that all was put here in a very unique way. The other things that we've discussed is the faith that we have to accept the book of Genesis. And just like when you see the Ken Ham and Bill Nye debates, yes, we have faith. I do believe it takes a lot of unbelief or blind faith, you may call it, or just trust in somebody who is guessing, to say that all of this was an accident and we just happen to be living in it. Yeah. Okay, so then we went on and as we began, we've used this verse here many times. And this verse is one I'm going to continue to go back to. And that is Ecclesiastes 1 and 9 through 10. And that is, that which has been is what will be, and that which is done is what will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which may it be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. Okay. If you remember, we talked about shape of the earth, and the pieces that we looked and was comparing back to, we know the Bible from Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. We know that a lot of these books were written 4,000, 3,000 BC. And it just, again, and I shared that document last week on estimated time of they were written. And the Bible, the last books were written sometime with Revelation being roughly about AD 96 or 96 AD. So a lot of what we have is we're looking through Job, and we're looking through the books of Isaiah. We're looking through the books of Genesis again, and we know these were written thousands of years ago. And the shapes, or the things that I wanted to go into that I think are the evidences that lead us to believe what we've come to, and that our faith in God's word is the rediscovery of so many things. Whether we're looking at the shape of the earth in Isaiah 40:22, that's very well stated. Psalms 19:5-6, we talked about understanding that the sun is in an orbit, or we believe the sun is in an orbit around something bigger. And you can see that here. Our sun, being in the corner here, or at the bottom, is rotating around this bigger star. The 226 million years to complete the orbit's, it's an estimation, right? I'm not going to worry too much about 226 million years as much as I am that the sun was in an orbit. Why, I remember when I was in school, we were taught the sun was planted and did not move. So again, our science continues to change. However, in Psalms 19, we learned that the sun is in an orbit. Job 38:24, we learned again about, Job was in the times of, really that book belongs back in the times of Genesis, but it comes later in the Bible. So it's not necessarily in chronological order as what you would think. But Job 38:24 explains about light being parted. And we covered that one last week. And we went through that demonstration. And that's a fun one. I love the science. Yes.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Oh, please do. Yes.
So I know that I've been taught that Job, if you had the Bible chronologically, Job probably would come really early on.
Yes.
So did the story of Job happen before the flood?
That's a good question. And what I would refer you to, let me pull my, and I have to admit, boy, you asked a good one there, Lisa. I'm going to have to go quickly and open up my document that I had used before on that and see if I can find it here.
If you want to defer,
yeah, I'll defer
and
on that.
come back to it later, that's perfectly fine. It's just, that just popped in my head that if Job indicates, about refracting light or deflecting light or whatever you call it, that I always thought that the first time that it really rained was the flood, which would mean that they probably wouldn't have really seen rainbows before the flood, which would have been even more interesting for Job to be talking about a rainbow if that happened before the flood.
That's a good point. Ken, your thoughts on that? Do you?
The rainbow on the flood was a new phenomenon that did not seen before. So, yeah.
Okay, and you were cutting out just a little bit there, Ken. I guess the.
I dropped off again. I may not be able to come back.
Okay, no problem at all. And I'm gonna pull up my the one study aid I like to go back and use again. So yeah, we know the rainbow, and of course that's why it was mentioned. It was a phenomenon, as Ken said, and that the light was never parted visibly until after the flood. If we look at the time, when Genesis written, approximate dates written about 14 BC. In my studies that I had gone back and looked, Job was about 950 BC. So best we can tell, Lisa, that would have happened after the flood. Approximately after the flood. So we're looking at Job happening, and I say at the time of Genesis, that's a date written, so sorry about that, that we're probably looking, yeah, maybe Job's events is happening, even in here, what I'm looking at could have even happened at the time of David. So I said the time of Genesis, it could have happened much after. Nobody's really sure, so I want to make a correction on that. Anybody else heard about the time Job was written, Bill, or anyone else want to comment on that? That is interesting.
No, I'm a listener today. I'm not a contributor.
Okay, no problem at all.
I just want to hear.
Yeah, and that would be interesting, Lisa, if it happened again. The numbers I had seen, Job had happened, actually not at the time of Genesis, but the events of Job would have happened, after that. They got around 950 or 1000 BC or so. We also talked about Matthew Fontaine, Marian. That's where we left off last week, and just how inspirational that he said that if God says it's there, I'm going to go find it. And he did. And he is now noted with his statue that you can go and visit. And because he based his belief on that in Psalms 8:8, that if the bird, it talks about the birds in the air, the fowl of the air, and the fish of the sea, and whatever passes through the paths of the sea, he said, well, the sea must have paths. And he went and he found them, and those are our modern ocean currents.
Amen.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then of course the statue and the plaque that you can now visit in the state of Virginia. There at the I think it's at the Naval Academy.
Bill, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, go right ahead.
Just a thought we might ponder and give some solution to maybe. Since the hydronic cycle is pretty easy to establish, such as the sun shines on the water evaporates, and it rises and forms clouds, forms rain, rains again, and so forth. I've heard a lot of people contend the fact that it never rained before the flood. Is that true or not, you think?
Yeah, yeah, good point. All we know, Bill, is before the time of the flood, Genesis refers to the vapor that was coming from the ground. So we have no evidence. And it says, it had never rained. So at the time of the flood, they had never seen this water falling from the sky, only, I guess, the vapor that would come from the ground to take care of the plants.
So is that to say the hydronic cycle did not exist prior to that?
That's a good point. I would think so, Bill. The other thing that I believe too is that when you look at the dates of a lot of these people, Methuselah lived 969 years. You clearly see that so many of these people lived hundreds of years old. And you're sitting there, how do you wrap your head around that? Well, another thought I've always had is if you can imagine living on an earth where we're very protected from the sun, and you imagine if that water could be stored, maybe everything was building up for that rain to start, but whatever was happening, there was things that were occurring that's hard for us to wrap our head around at the time that the earth was created, that allowed these people to live that amount of time. Now, another thing that could have happened too is at a time of new earth, maybe there was less disease and so many other things, but clearly people lived a lot longer than what they did today.
There is a scientist in northern Texas, in Glen Rose area. I don't know if he's still there, but he was a decade ago. And he is of the thought that before the flood, there was a much higher level of oxygen on the earth, and that might have been one of the things that enabled people to live so much longer. And how he came up with that, or someone did, and he had studied it, was because of a hammer that was found embedded deep within a coal bed. And I mean, this coal bed was supposedly millions of years old, and yet when it was chiseled out, a hammer came out, a very primitive hammer. But in the iron used in the head of the hammer, when it was analyzed, it was found to be, I believe, if I remember right, impossible to make with today's oxygen level. I'm not a chemist.
Oh, yeah. Right.
but you would, in order to forge that type of metal, you would had to have had high oxygen be surrounded with high oxygen.
And no, and there's so many things that, you know, I always said that I can't wait to get to heaven, to ask God. Or is it, you've always heard about the atheist and the Christian talking, and they said, well, I can't wait to get to heaven and ask that. And the atheist says, well, what about if, what about if it doesn't, if we don't believe in all that? And at the end of the deal, the Christian looks back at the atheist, said, what about if you end up going to hell or something? The atheist said, well, then you can ask him. But is one of those jokes I completely messed up. Anyway, no, yeah, and the point being there, you know, naturally, we look at these evidences, and the reason we look at all of this is one that we hope that everybody could believe in the Bible creation, and you begin to believe in the Bible, and you realize, why do we do all this? Well, heaven and hell is real. And Christ was real, and he walked on this earth, and we want everybody to believe in that, so that everyone could go to heaven. It's important to mention that when we talk about these scientific evidences too, and I forgot to mention this earlier, again, the quote that I keep referring back to by a good pastor had made years ago, that man would not have written such a book as the Bible if he could, and could not if he would. It moves in superhuman plane and design and nature and in teaching, and it caters not to worldly desire and ambition. It condemns much of what man in the flesh highly prize, and commends much of what they despise. Its thoughts are not the thoughts of men. The other thing to bring up is there are 5 books that have claimed to be inspired. One is Mary Baker Eddy, Science and Health with a Key to the Scriptures, that claims to be a revelation from God for all mankind and like a supplement to the Bible. The Latter-day Saints, the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, have 3 books that I know of. One is the Doctrine and the Covenants, another one, The Pearl of Great Price, and of course the Book of Mormon. And then you add to that the one by Mary Baker Eddy we mentioned, and then of course the 5th one being the Bible. Now when you pull those together and begin saying, well, if it is truly inspired, we're looking for scriptures to be from the hand of God, and we know there's error in this has been in translations, and we know that from the King James to the NIV to the English Standard Version and so on, that we tend to get closer to original transcripts. But what you'll find out is the Bible, in my comparisons and everything that I have done, only the Bible can stand the test of time over and over and over, that can help us understand. Of course, and there, I guess the other one that would claim to be inspired, of course, is the Quran. I messed that up. But that would be another one that would claim to be inspired, in probably more inspired by man, but still it is a one they claim. Again, the Bible, to me, in my studies, it blows me away when you begin to look at these proofs, because if it claims to be inspired, then you're going to have to back it up. And the Bible brings the test of time, and it brings the proof through these scientific evidences that we're looking through. Any comments on that before we jump into the rest of the study tonight?
Well, 2 things. One, there are people for centuries who have been trying to chisel away at the Bible, especially in the last 150 years,
yes,
trying to prove that it couldn't be true. And I don't think you can say that about the others. Perhaps, I mean, there are people who are trying to disprove them too, but not as many as the Bible. And I can't remember what the other comment was.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. The Bible is still the #1 book of all time. And people say, well, it's been around the longest. Well, yeah, I'm not going to debate that a bit. We know it's been around the longest. Matter of fact, the first book that was on the Gutenberg press was the Bible, right? And the reason it was invented was to reproduce it. And you ever get a chance to go to the archives up in DC and take a look at that, it's just fascinating and so on. Well, let's get in. Yeah.
Well, I remember what it was. It had to do with the evidences of how many of the old time artifacts there are that have portions of the Bible, and when laid side by side, they are so close. And there's nothing else like that is so scrutinized, like the works of Shakespeare. If somebody wanted to doubt that Shakespeare had actually written those, they're and then you have, say, several old manuscripts that prove, okay, this could have been him. But with the Bible, I forget how many, but it's a huge number of ancient artifacts from many places that really takes away, should take away a lot of the doubt.
And Carol, the more we dig, and of course we talked about the code of Hammurabi that's over in the Louvre in France, and so many things over there, and then you go over to a specific spot at that museum that, again in France. You go to the area, it's called the Early Life, where everything was found, and it's very very well documented, 3,000 to 4,000 5,000 BC that they've actually have artifacts and the bowls and the early spoons or whatever they would try to carve to eat. And it's agreed upon. It all was formed in Mesopotamia. Well, we know that it's between the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Bible tells us that. Again, it's like, I got to believe at some point in time, God looks at us and going, how much more do I have to give you? So let's jump in this tonight. Yeah. Job, I want to have you read here in Job 38:16. Again, what we're trying to do is understanding things that we have rediscovered, but how long ago we've really known about them. So in just get ready for Ken here in just a moment. But in the 1960s, late 1960, they found these metal-rich hot brines were used they were discovered using sonar in the bottom of the Red Sea, as you see here. And the brine, this brine was an indirect evidence of water coming out of the ocean floor. They aided by reports from Mexico, the divers in Mexico. Scientists used scuba equipment to locate the shallow water hot springs along the coast of Baja California in the late 60s. Again, a good article on that. And what we have found here, what's all this is about, was who would have thought that there were freshwater springs or springs in the sea? Now, how in the world would they have ever found this thousands of years ago? Because there was no way for man to dive down and even figure this out. Ken, go ahead if you would read that.
All right, Job 38:16. Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep?
Okay, have you entered into the springs of the sea and recesses of the deep? So there's two of them, and we're going to come back to that second one in a minute. We talked about the springs of the sea, and then Genesis 7:11.
All right. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day of all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heaven were opened.
Okay, so we blow right past that when we talk about the great flood. But isn't that interesting how that in the times of Noah, that we always think about it, what did it do for 40 days and 40 nights? It rained. Not only did it rain, what else happened? The fountains of the deep did what? They burst forth. Oh yeah. So yeah, can you imagine not only the rain happening, but the fountains of these springs? It's like the earth had all of this in it, and all of a sudden it just turned loose, or maybe God just created it during that time. I mean, I don't know.
It would be very overwhelming.
Yeah, and so could the earth have been flooded completely? Oh, you bet. If you imagine all these recesses or these the fountains of the deep turning loose. So here we have it in Job, and we have it in Genesis. Genesis being the oldest one, written by Moses. Think now about this evidence that we have in two different spots, but yet we didn't even have any idea that there were springs in the sea until to the 60s. Let's look at one more with that. Again, back to the trenches in the sea. In 1873, a team of British scientists working in the Pacific Ocean found a recess 5.5 miles deep. Later, another team discovered another trench that was 35,800 feet deep. Okay, so now we're moving from something here that was about 25,000 feet to 35,000. We know that there's even deeper recesses than that, and of course, Hollywood's made so many movies about all of this. And this was the picture of the 1873 British team. But to actually be able to find out what was there before that, we just sort of thought, again, a long time ago, we thought the Earth was square, or didn't really understand what would happen. But just like that on the ocean floor, we just thought it was just sort of a flat void. Never really thought of it as such as trenches and mountains and all these things that would be down there. And just we talk about going to space, but equally as hard, it's going down in the ocean and very difficult to see. Again, Job knew that. Not only did he learn about the springs of the sea, but he told us about the recesses of the depth. Any comments or questions about that? Okay.
Did you say we thought the Earth was square? Is that what you said?
Yeah, at one time we did think the Earth was square, right?
Oh, I knew flat. I hadn't thought about square.
Well,
okay.
Yeah. Well, there were some that thought it being everything from flat to, at some point in time, I say square, but square would be, what I mean is by flat, Carol, that you would go, and at some point in time you would just go off of it.
Off.
Yeah. So good point. Maybe not this exactly square, but maybe we're just all living on a plane. Thank you. Okay. Bill, there was some background noise there, so I muted you just for a second. If you need to, when you need to speak up, just wave at me and I'll pop you right back on there. Okay, Genesis 6:15. Let's read about that, Carol. If you go ahead, we'll start off with the verse.
Just verse 15. I thought
go ahead and pick up with verse 12 if you would.
And if you don't mind, I'll back up one more. Verse 11.
Absolutely.
The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. And you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks.
Thank you, Carol. And we know that the measure of a cubit is, roughly 2.5 feet or so. But the easiest way to explain a cubit, it was about the length of from the tip of your finger to your elbow, because they could run and it was an easy measure for most people. Now we know not everybody had the same length, so a cubit was different for everybody. But it was a way that they could begin to measure. When you began to look at that 300 cubits by 50 by 30, you break that down, divide everything by 10, you get this ratio of 30 to 5 to 3. So in 1844, a man named, and I'm going to mess this up, Isambard Brunel built a giant ship. It was called the Great Britain. And he used almost the exact ratio of the ark. And as it turned out, he found out, in his opinion, that this was probably the best ratio that he could find to move cargo in seaworthiness. Again, not for speed. To give you some more on that, Ken Ham and the folks up there with the Ark Encounter have really done really well with this. Or you can go to Apologetics Press and learn more. A picture up here in the right-hand corner. If you have not been to the Ark, it is a sight to behold. It's actually the largest wooden object on the face of the earth. And of course, I guess I would say it's the second largest wooden object on the face of the earth, because the original one is all covered on Mount Ararat. But the Amish built this, and there was a lot of poetic justice, I guess I would say, in the design, because you go in there and they're using some modern connections. But just to see something other of that ship and that size, and you walk in and just the magnitude of it, you realize very quickly and how they would make assumptions. And I know some of you have been there, make assumptions on how you handle the sanitation and how you could bring the water in from the top and go down through and so on. Again, there's a lot of guesswork involved in that, but the point being is, could animals exist on something that, on every animal on the face of the earth exist on that? Absolutely it could. And again, these early creatures that may have existed don't necessarily, that nothing's saying that these creatures had to be full size, right? They could have been rather small. And if I was going to be Noah and I was chosen to pick things, if I had a baby elephant or a large elephant to choose from, I'm going to choose the baby. But and so on. And again, we're going to defend things like that all day long as Christians. But the point being is, could it have happened? Absolutely. And did it happen? Absolutely. And here you go again to say, what is this ratio? How in the world did Noah, had no need for a boat, had no need for rain, all of a sudden he's told to build this thing, and out of it comes the perfect dimensions? Seriously, the perfect dimensions in the book of Genesis. And it wasn't until thousands of years later that we proved this, that yeah, that is the perfect dimension. The boat you can see today, again, just a massive, massive object. U.S. military, I love this one. My son always loved the name of this one, the Ugly Duckling. Built the USS Jeremiah OBrien. And in shipbuilders in World War II, as you see here, they used that same ratio, 300 to 50 to 30, or simplified 30 to 5 to 3. Long width and height to build a ship known as the USS Jeremiah OBrien. It was in the group of Liberty ships, which were referred to as the Ugly Ducklings. And it was a barge-like boat built to carry tremendous amounts of cargo. Again, I would refer you to this link here, and we could actually go, click it and bring it up if it would allow me to do that. But if you've never got to see it, the USS Jeremiah OBrien is there today, and you can look at it and you say, huh. So if we sort of built that thing out of wood, boy, that looks an awful lot like an ark. So interesting. Noah was a pretty smart man, or can we just say that Noah was inspired by God like so many people before? Let's look at another one. This is another one I love to look at. Now we're going to move from oceanography now into, we're going to move into a little bit more of the physics, back into the physics area. The earth is wearing out. We know, and of course it's stated in Hebrews, we're stated in Hebrews 8 and 13, but where did they get that from? Is Isaiah 51:6. That we learn here that the earth is wearing out. And we're going to read that in just a moment, whoever has that ready. So we have rediscovered 4 billion years from now. By the way, I'm worried about my children. I'm worried about my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. After that, I can't affect much. 4 billion years is way out there, folks. The increase of the Earth's surface temperature will cause a runaway greenhouse effect. By that point, most if not all life on the surface will be extinct. Now I say that previous in a little bit of a joke, but the point being there is, yeah, we're concerned and we're stewards of the environment. God put us in charge of the animals, and doesn't mean that we go slaughter everything and waste it. And I believe a Christian should be, we should be the ones helping to pick up the trash. We should be the ones trying to take care of what God has given us. But the earth was never made to last forever. So recent findings in the past 100 years, we know that life on earth will be extinct. So when will Christ come again? I promise you it's going to be before 4 billion years from now. But it will not be livable in the form that we know now. The earth is wearing out. Well, all we had to do was open up Isaiah 51:6. If you go ahead and read that.
Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look on the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish away like smoke. The earth will grow old like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will not be abolished. Beautiful.
Oh, it is absolutely a beautiful inspirational verse written by the prophet Isaiah. And again, we skim over so many of these, but all of these little hints, whether it's in Genesis, in Job, in Isaiah, all these little pieces that God put in there that it's so hard to wrap our heads around. But there it is. I mean, there's the prediction of what's going to happen. The earth is going to wear out, but that's okay. We don't have to worry because God's going to save us, and that we will have life after death. Carol, thank you for reading that. I just love to look at this and say, Isaiah could have had no idea about what he was writing down, other than he just wrote what God was telling him. But yeah, it's right. The earth is wearing out, and we know that, and we have rediscovered that today. Any comments there? I do want to pull up again about the time. If we look about the time Isaiah was writing that. That was approximately at the time of about 750 to 650 BC. So again, that's quite a bit of time before Christ, and I promise you, way more than 1,000 years ago, right? Okay. Or way more than 100 years ago, and closer to 2,500 years ago. So. Okay, let's move on, and we'll do one more tonight. Then we'll close out in prayer, and then next week we're going to leave some more to cover as we get a little bit more into the medical field. We're going to do one tonight in the realm of medicine. I am not a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor, but as I found out, I faint pretty easily at the sight of blood, so I would not be the one to ever take care of anyone. So thus I became an engineer. Without looking at this, who knows how George Washington died? George Washington, he would have died anyway, right? Natural causes. But really, we used the process called leeching to put leeches on him. We're going to look at that in just a moment. One of the concepts that's so hard for us to wrap our head around, and for me as a kid early on, is to understand, we talked about being washed in the blood, and I thought that's just gross, right? We talk about terms that we're saved by the blood of Christ. Well, today's world, we look and say, I don't want anything, I don't want near blood, right? Blood transmits disease, and we've all painted the opposite picture of what blood is. It wasn't until more recently we discovered that blood is the life of the body. Without blood, there is no life. And you go back and you look at all the sacrifices that were done in the Old Testament, and not knowing how much you all dug into that, but boy, you really dig into it and look, and I know some of you have, and you understand that as they would take that animal, and they would kill that animal, and they would take the entrails out and prepare it. The blood that they would drain from it, the high priest would take it and they would sprinkle. And that was the sprinkling that would happen, and they would throw it on the people to bless them. And why they did that, to cleanse them with the blood, right? Because this was a sacrifice that was being offered, not any sacrifice, but a perfect sacrifice that was being offered, a firstborn sacrifice, firstborn male sacrifice, just like Christ. And so we look at the blood being the life of the body. Everything they did was centered around the blood. And then, of course, we know they would burn that, and then there were parts that they would eat, and so on. And that was for the blood sacrifices. And we know that God explained, and why did he choose blood? Because it's the one thing we can't live without. And guess what? There's a lot of substitutes. We can come up with mechanical hearts and different things. But what do we have to donate to keep other people alive? It's our blood. Absolutely. It is absolutely, when you look at what a human body is worth, you may say, well, there's not a lot of water in it, and it's not worth that much. It's just the weight of it and everything. But the blood itself is where the money is. It's where it moves everything around. Okay, so let's take a look at this just for a moment. Bloodletting is the withdrawal of the small quantities. And I don't want to gross you out because it grosses me out too, but is removing the small quantities of blood from a patient to cure or prevent illness and disease. I know you all have seen it and you've heard about it, but it was a very common practice. And you've seen it done on TV, and whether you watch some Rambo movie or when he's getting the leeches off of him, or you see him where they'll actually put them on people. It was a practice to lower the blood. Now, if a person actually has a really high iron content, the only thing you can do, the blood's so thick, the only thing you can do is remove blood. So there's times you can remove blood to help folks so the body can reproduce. But this was a practice performed for almost 2,000 years. George Washington asked to be bled heavily after he developed a throat infection from weather exposure. Within a 10-hour period, about 3 liters of blood. Okay, so think about that. There's probably, it's a liter is close to it's close to a quart. Yeah, absolutely. And we have I forget how much blood's in the body, but the point being here is they took out 4 quarts of blood. If anybody knows the amount of blood in a human body, please speak up. But the point here is that they took too much blood. And it was withdrawn prior to his death. And what he had was a throat infection. So he actually killed the father of our country because of our lack of knowledge. We didn't understand that until recently, I would say in the last 100 years, that we become to understand, or 150 years, that blood is the absolute life of the body. That's why God chose blood sacrifices. That's why God explained that when Christ dies on the cross, that he is offering his blood. His blood cleanses us from all sin, as we say. And when you begin to understand this, you begin to understand, so blood is life, and without Christ's blood, I cannot be near God. I cannot be saved. Well, let's look how it was explained here in Leviticus 17, 11 through 14. That's our last verse for the night. Who will read that one for me?
I've got that one.
Oh, thank you, Scott.
For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood, nor any stranger who dwells among you eat blood. Whatever man of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who dwell among you, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover with dust. For it is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains life. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of all flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off.
So when you begin to think just what was inspirational and inspired by God, that was written in the book of Leviticus, and again going back here to this chart I continue to look at, we know that the book of Leviticus was written very early, written by Moses, approximately about 1400 BC. Again, these first 5 books are called the Pentateuch, or the early laws, or the 5. Here we find out at such an early time, blood is the life of the body. Here we go. I just found this number. I love Google, folks. The average adult has about 1.5 gallons, or about 5 liters of blood. So yeah, they took about 4/5 of George Washington's blood. No way for him to survive. I didn't realize they had taken that much.
And I looked it up too. There were 2 different things. One, it said 1 to 1.5 gallons in the average adult.
Okay.
But it said how much before you die. You can lose between half to 2/3, and you will die if you lose between half and 2/3. But he lost more than that.
Yeah, and amazing. We know all of that today. We didn't then. The other thing that we pick up from what Scott read is very important. We don't need to be drinking that blood. God protect, and we're going to look at so many of these other laws on germs and animals and things that we should stay away from. One thing that God's people would do was multiply over and over and over without disease and so on. And a lot of this was done not just through God's divine protection, but through them obeying him. And by obeying him, they avoided certain meats. They avoided, certain animals, certain fish. They avoided drinking blood. Matter of fact, if I was over in China, one of the common things to do was to drink a blood of a certain, I think it was snake blood or something. And no, not for me. But things like that are common practice. Well, we know the danger in that, and God was saying, take the blood and put it away. So here it is, blood is the life of the body. But boy, don't go ingest it, because that's not what it's meant for. Isn't that interesting? And I guess people were thinking, wow, if it's the life of the body, give me more of it, right? Absolutely not in that sense, that don't go drink it. Anyway, interesting story that we didn't even figure out to the past 150 years or so, that the blood is the life of the body. But there it was in Leviticus 17 all along, if we'd have just looked to God's word for that. Any comment? Close out tonight. Yes, Lisa.
I just have a real quick comment. I don't know if it really fits in here, but this just kind of popped in my head. When we were talking about the importance of the blood to the body, I also think it's really interesting how there is so much that can be diagnosed about the body just simply from a blood test.
Isn't that amazing? Anything
from disease, whether a heart attack has happened, if you're pregnant, all different kinds of things. How's your nutrition going? There's just so much stuff that someone's blood can tell us about the condition of the human body as well.
And that's where in studies like this, I wish, and maybe next time I'll try to get somebody from the medical field on. It is really amazing to sit and listen to, you hear about doctors, but when they actually go into the details of everything that happens and understanding how your body will go through, and like you're talking, Lisa, with the antibodies and produce white blood cells and red blood, and how all that works, and just the complexity of what is in this red substance that's in our body that we just take for granted. And as my heart pumps, it's flowing through. But just amazing that we could ever think that it's an accident.
Right.
Absolutely not.
And what you were saying, Lisa, in looking at the blood, they look at what's in the blood. They also look at what's not in the blood. And there's formulas they use and can determine all kinds of things.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing and humbling. And of course, another thing too, Carol, I know you looked up about the blood in the body. I remember that the body always carries, what is it, like a pint, a reserve, that if something were to happen, that that pint comes in and backs you up quickly. Yeah, just amazing. Again, just how the body works. And but yeah, blood is the life of the body. I was blown away to find out how George Washington died. I never really had paid attention to that. So, yeah.
Well, not only the fact that we're not supposed to eat it because it's not really good for you, but also meat doesn't taste as good unless it's bled out. For those that hunt, if you harvest a deer and that deer runs for a while before it goes down, pumps those muscles full of blood, it is tough. It doesn't have the same taste as one that drops on the spot that you can harvest quickly. And you hang it up and let it drain, same as they do when they butcher pork or beef or anything else. They let it hang for quite a while to drain. But if you get an animal that's under duress, that's running and pumps those muscles full of blood, that meat will taste different. It's tougher. there's more reasons behind than just it's not good for you. You'll get a better product if you get rid of the blood as well.
So Scott, I hear you making a pretty good argument that God also invented grade A beef.
Right.
That's I never really thought about that, but absolutely. And they hang it and let it all drain out and so on. And boy, Scott, you're going to get me faint here pretty quickly. But but it is. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. Again, and if you haven't read some of those animal laws and food laws, I'm going to give you a little peek of where we're going so you can read ahead a bit. But I want you to, if you can, try to read part of Numbers 19 and Leviticus 13 through 15 and Leviticus 11 and just pick up some of that, some of the stuff that we brush over, but and just amazing with the food laws, because we are not going to have time to do it justice, but amazing with all the different food laws that were there to protect God's people.
One more quick thought. In thinking about that blood that was sprinkled over the people,
yes,
by the priest, they're taking for granted. They're expecting that the priest has only accepted unblemished, healthy animals for the sacrifice. What if the priest was lax, didn't really care, and he's letting these things, with all kinds of diseases and monstrous eyes and whatever, and they're sprinkling that blood over the people?
Well, and you're right. And there's all the laws. I mean, go ahead and jump in there to read about it. But the animals, it talks about animals with a tumor, or if you had, and these are things we didn't even know back then, but we just took for granted. But animals, or you have pelt that had a tumor, and they were told to take that out and incinerate it or burn it, get rid of it. And the people that where they found that or got in contact, they were to be separated, quarantined. We know that term very well. I guess God created social distancing way before we did.
That's right.
Yeah. I like to call it physical distancing, but yeah, go ahead.
Just a follow-up comment on what she was saying. I think if that was the case and a priest was to willingly accept something like that or try to sacrifice something like that, we know what happened when the
strange fire.
Wrong fire was used.
Oh yeah.
Strange fire.
The sons of Levi, yes.
I think that priest would have suffered the consequences, not the people who the blood was sprinkled on.
Yeah, just imagine how that's a good point, Scott. And imagine, because again, God protects his people. And there was a reason those priests wore the on the bottom of their hymns, the bell and pomegranate, because the moment you heard that quit moving, something went really south in the Holy of Holies. Yeah, thank you, Scott. Bill, would you like to close us out in prayer tonight?
Sure, be glad to. Let's all bow our head, please. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to stop and think and ponder those issues that you've so vividly presented to us in your history, and especially in the Old Testament record, that we can study and learn and be amazed today that so many things were known way before us. So, Father, we thank Phil for taking the time to present this to us. Watch over us always. Forgive us our sins. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you all for joining tonight, and we'll see everyone next week.